All right, so now that we have checked this out, we've got our animation refined, we've done our play blast to check and make sure everything's good in terms of timing, we're ready to kick this out as a render. Now, just like we did beforehand, you can add some beautification to this. So let's go ahead and just drop in a few lights here real quick. I'm just going to get my ball in place. I'm going to come to Create, Light, Directional, flip on my light switch here, flip on my shadows, and maybe do the same here. So this way I get the feedback on this side. So we can just click light shadows on this one and just really quickly light our scene. Now, if you already have your scene lit from the first time, feel free to just stick with that. I accidentally imported my file that did not have lighting, so I'm going to have to bring this up. Now, something to be aware of, if you're in the animation view, your attribute editor will actually be a floating screen. We can get back to the old view by going to Windows, Workspaces, and General. So this is what we've been working in. And I prefer to work in the general screen, so I'm going to just kick this on. Let me turn on my viewport, and we want to make our shadows work with our angle. So since this ball is just kind of bouncing along, I'm going to do a top-down angle and just make sure that none of the shadows really get in the way of the ball here. That way it has a nice bit of appeal. I'm going to add just a little bit of color into this light. Not a whole lot, but let's get a sun-colored look to it here. Just a small amount of yellow. So that way we have a little bit going on there in terms of the lighting. Maybe push it a little bit more towards the orange-red range. That looks good. And then I'll just come in and create a light. And since we're going to use a Hardware 2.0 render, I'll just add in an ambient light. And we'll go ahead and give this a nice sky blue. Gives us a nice sky blue to those rocks in the background, which is great. That'll look nice once we get our sky composited in here. And there we go. So now we have our little shot put together. We have some nice lighting. We can see how this is going to come together. Now, unfortunately, once again, the shadows are going to be our nemesis here. They're not going to look great. You could try switching your shadows over here to use depth mapped shadows. That's this little checkbox here. And you can crank that resolution up. And sometimes those look better than the ray trace shadows. You can also play around with things like the filter size to make those have a bit more appeal. You could try taking that even higher. I think 6 might be enough, though. You kind of get diminishing returns there. And that does look a little bit nicer. So that's going to be, once again, in the light settings, coming down here to the depth map shadows and turning those on. Now, by default, it uses something called ray trace shadows. And technically, ray trace shadows are better quality. But when you're dealing with Hardware 2.0, you can actually fake the shading better with depth map usually. Actually, it looks pretty good, honestly. I'm not going to complain. I think if we get the angle there, we can actually get those flat enough to work. So at this point, we're getting a pretty nice looking Hardware 2.0 render. I think this could pass as decent. So now that I have this in place, let me go ahead and save. I'm going to do a save scene as. We'll just make this our bouncing ball forward render file. And we can talk about something called batch rendering in image sequences. So when you get this out of here, you render in the form of individual images. There's a lot of reasons why you do that. One way is to kind of make a nod back to the old days of animation where you were doing a drawing per frame. So what we get out of here with an image sequence is essentially a drawing per frame. The other reason is videos have compression. So in the Play Blast section, I talked about different video codecs. I talked about AVI versus QuickTime versus H.264. Compression basically makes your image quality worse. It makes it not as good as it could be. And the thing is, when we're dealing with film, these go through several different passes of compression. So we're going to take this over to After Effects. And it could be potentially compressed out of After Effects into a video format. And then we'll take it into something like Adobe Premiere for editing. And then once it gets out of there, it could be compressed. So there's a chance by the time a video file sees the end of production, it could go through compression 3 times or more. So to prevent that, we use an image sequence. So when it goes into something like After Effects, there is no compression. And then out of After Effects, if we want to, we can even render that out as an image sequence so there's no compression. And then that could be handed off into editing to have everything stitched together where the final compression would essentially be added to. We'll probably be stopping in After Effects for ours because I think 3 software packages is plenty ambitious for an intro class. But that's an idea of how it all kind of comes together. So how do we get this set up? Well, the first thing we need to do is swap our renderer over. So we already know how to do that. We need to come to our render settings here and do a hardware 2.0 render. So let's get that set, open that up. And then at the top here, swap this from Arnold renderer to hardware 2.0. And the hardware 2.0 section here, let's go ahead and adjust some settings real quick. Since we're using anti-aliasing, let's crank that to 16. And since we're using our screen space ambient occlusion, set that to 32 with a filter radius of 32. That way we just get those nice smooth shadows that we're looking for. We can just kind of confirm that, getting our ball to jump onto here. That looks fine. Also might want to change its size. You'll see it's kind of bigger than our reflection, so I might adjust the radius there to be a bit tighter. And I can play around with things like the amount here as well. So I'm just going to get that to be a bit tighter around the base of those. I think the amount default was 1, so we'll get that back to there. And that should give us a little bit better look at that. All right, so the settings are set. In the common attributes, we can change these up. One of the things we've already looked at is going to be the HD section. And since this is a hardware 2.0, let's do an HD 1080 since that's going to render out nice and quick for us. Now we need to start exploring some of the uncharted territory, but let's check our render first just to see how it's looking and just get another look at it to make sure there's nothing wrong. You can open your render view using the eyeball here, and you can check that. In the render view, you can click your little render slate to render this out. And you'll see we have the wrong camera. So we're going to want to make sure it's set to the correct camera. So up here under render, we can switch to render, and we can go ahead and switch this over to the forest scene camera lock shot cam. And we can see our scene. Now we're ready to batch render. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And let's go ahead and talk about the render settings for batch rendering. So one of the first things we're going to want to do is at the top here, you want to check this color management. If you don't check this color management, you're going to get that situation where everything you kick out is going to look too dark. So check that apply output transform to render. That way we can kick this out with the correct colors. And then coming to the file output, this is going to be one of the most important things because this is what we're exporting out of here. For this project, we'll go ahead and keep this as a PNG format. PNG, if you're not familiar, is a format that has not as high of compression as something like a JPEG, but it also supports an alpha transparency channel. So the sky, rather than appearing gray back here, is actually going to be see-through, and we can add in whatever sky we want, which is really nice for compositing. One of the most important things we need to do is here, and that's the frame/animation extension. So what you're looking at is the name of the file, the extension, which is the file type, and then the functionality, which is currently single frame. If you expand this, it's going to give you the formats for image sequences. And the one we want to use is going to be name.number.extension. What that's going to do is it's going to kick out a file name, which is going to be an identifier of what this belongs to. So they're all going to have the same name. The .number is going to be the number in the frame sequence. So what number it is. And then the extension's the file type. So you need to have it in this format, either name.number.extension or name_.extension. Those will both work. The reason why we're using name.number is because that is the most universally compatible. So let's do name.number.extension. For the frame padding, you need a number of zeros equal to the number of zeros of frames, because that's going to be, for example, frame 001, frame 002. In this case, we have 4, which is fine. No reason to adjust that. Moving down, we can set the frame range. So the frame range is going to set the start and end time. So we want the end time to be our very last frame over here. Now, if you don't know what that is, you can just look at your range slider down here and you can get an idea. You could also click and drag all the way to the end if you felt compelled to. But we're going to want this to start at frame 1 and go to frame 108. And we want it to play by every 1 frame. You can make it render every 2 or every 3 to kind of get a jumpy motion, and they do that in some action movies nowadays. We also used to do something called animating on 2s, where basically every frame would hold for 2 frames, so you could also play around with changing that up. That was what they would do back in the traditional drawing days to save money, because paper and pens were expensive. We don't need to worry about that in the digital world. So 1 for your start time, put in whatever your personal end time is, make sure it's by frame 1. Scrolling down, you'll see renderable camera. This is also important because when we hit the batch render, it's going to render out a specific camera. So we're going to want to make sure that is set to our shot cam. And that's it. We already adjusted our resolution, so we're good to go. We don't need to worry about any of those. We're ready to render out our first image sequence. So we can close this out. And what we need to do now is navigate over to our rendering menu. So let's go ahead and click our drop down here to get to rendering. And in the rendering menu, we're going to come over here to render. And in here, you're going to see the option to batch render. So if you come down here and you select batch render, this will start your batch render. So let's click that. And you're going to see nothing's happening, which is weird. The cool thing about batch rendering is it happens in the background. To check its progress, you can actually click your script editor here. And with the script editor open, it will show you the visual progress of your batch render. So you'll see it currently says rendering with hardware 2.0 right here. And once it gets started, you're going to see it rapidly kick out images. So what's happening here is it is cranking out these images as fast as it can. And if I expand this, we can see the frame number associated with it. And if you navigate to your folder here, and we go into our Section 3 project and images, you can see it's producing a sequence of images here that we're going to be able to upload into a image sequence reading software like After Effects. So this is going to kick out our animation as individual keyframes. Okay, so that is the process. It does take a little bit to render. Just be mindful, this is the fastest renderer we're going to be using. Once we get into working with Arnold, this is going to take a very long time. That's the reason we're starting here, okay? But I think this is already done. It's already kicked out 108 of these. Once you have these, what you want to do is right-click and create a new folder. And we're just going to name this Ball Bounce Animation. And we can drag all of these into here. Now, if you're not familiar with working with this number of image files, you can click the first one, then come down to the bottom and hold Shift and click the last. That will select all of these. And then you can just move them into your folder. And this is going to be what we bring into After Effects as an image sequence. Now, for fun, you can also double click on this to open this up in your image browser. And if you hit your overwrite keys and just hold them, you can kind of do a flip book of your animation to see how this is going to play out. So you can see how this is eventually going to come into something like After Effects and be usable as an image sequence, which is pretty cool. Okay, so as a challenge, what I want you to do is I want you to beautify your scene. Go ahead and add in some of those effects we've seen in terms of anti-aliasing, ambient occlusion. Get some lights in there if you don't already have it. And then I want you to take the next step in your rendering journey and do a batch rendering to produce an image sequence that we can bring over to After Effects. Okay, so go ahead and give that a shot, and then we're going to see how we can take our next steps in the pipeline and try out some post-production techniques to add in a sky and some additional effects to our animation.